The stuffed bear had one "I'm missing" and a long tear down its back like something had grabbed it and pulled hard. Someone had left it on the step outside the shop with a folded note tucked under its arm. Danny Holt found it at 6 in the morning. When he unlocked the front door, still holding his coffee, he read the note standing in the doorway. "Please fix her. I have no money. She belongs to my little sister. No name. No address." Danny looked at the bear for a long moment. Then he brought it inside. His shop sat at the end of a narrow street in the lower district of Caldwell City, wedged between a laundry that smelled of burnt fabric and a food stall run by a Druhari family who played loud music every evening. The sign above the door said Holtz in faded paint. Below it, someone had once added a small drawing of a toy rocket in chalk. Rain had worn it down almost nothing, but Danny had never wiped it away completely. The inside of the shop was small and crowded in a comfortable way. Shelves ran from floor to ceiling on every wall. Toys covered every surface. Some were waiting to be repaired. Some were finished and waiting to be collected. A few had been there so long they had become part of the furniture, and Danny had stopped expecting anyone to come back for them. He worked at a low wooden bench near the window where the light was good. The tools hanging above it were small and careful things. Needles, thread, wire, tiny screwdrivers, paint brushes no thicker than a finger. He had learned to use all of them the same way he had learned most things in his life. Slowly, on his own, because no one else was going to teach him, but he set the bear down on the bench and got to work. The lower district had changed a lot in the last decade. Caldwell City had always been a working port, and when the Galactic Compact opened Earth to outside trade 30 years ago, the port had grown fast and strange. Ships that did not look like ships came and went from the orbital docks. People who did not look like people moved into the lower streets because the rent was cheap and no one asked many questions. Most of them were quiet neighbors. Some of them were not. The city had learned to absorb it all the way cities always do, slowly and without much ceremony. Danny had lived in the lower district his whole life. He did not find it strange anymore. He found it ordinary, which was different. Around midday, a child appeared at his window. She was small, standing on the tips of her feet to see over the lower edge of the glass. She was not human. Her skin had a faint silver tone to it, and her ears came to soft points. Her eyes were large and dark, the kind of dark that seemed to catch light rather than reflect it. She wore plain clothes, a little too big for her, and she held something pressed against her chest with both hands. Danny looked up from the bear he was stitching. The child looked back at him. He raised one hand in a small wave. Nothing threatening, just a hello. She dropped from her tiptoes and disappeared. Danny went back to work. He did not think much of it. Children came and went from his window often. He had a few things in the front display that tended to catch eyes. A wind-up metal fish that swam in circles. A small paper crane that folded and unfolded itself when you pressed a button. A tiny glass globe with a model city inside that lit up at night. That'd be why late afternoon the bear was done. New, stitched back, stuffing rearranged so it sat properly again. Danny wrapped in brown paper and left it outside the front door before he locked up for the night. He did not know who to give it to. Leaving it outside was the only thing that made sense. Before he went in, he took a piece of card from under the counter and wrote on it with a marker. He hung it on a small nail beside the door, where people could see it from the street, that IT said, "Broken things welcome. No coin needed." He had written versions of that sign before. This was not the first time and would not be the last. Across the street, standing very still in the shadow between a parked cargo cart and the wall of a building, an old figure watched him hang the sign. The figure wore a long coat and a scarf pulled up high, the way people dressed when they did not want to be recognized. After a moment, the figure looked down at the small silver-toned child standing beside them. The child was looking at the sign too. The figure said something in a low voice. The child did not answer. She just kept looking at the shop, at the window with the lights still on inside, at the toys on the shelves, just visible through the glass, that in her hand she still held the thing she had been holding all day. It was a music box, old and small, made of a pale material that was not quite wood and not quite metal. One of its sides was cracked. The tiny mechanism inside made no sound. When she turned the key, EY.IT had not made a sound in 2 years. She pressed it a little tighter to her chest and let the figure lead her away down the street. Behind them, the light in the shop stayed on for a long time. She came back on a Tuesday. Danny was in the middle of repairing a toy spaceship for a boy named Freddie who lived 2 streets over. Freddie had brought it in himself, walking very seriously and carrying the broken ship in both hands like it was something precious, which it was to him. One of the landing fins had snapped clean off, and the little cockpit window had a crack across it. Freddie had watched Danny set it on the bench and explained in great detail exactly how it had broken, not because Danny asked, but because Freddie felt the ship deserved a full explanation of events. Danny had listened to every word. Now Freddie was gone, and Danny was carefully matching the paint on the repaired fin, and the door opened, and the small silver-toned girl walked in. She stopped just inside the doorway. She looked around the shop the way people do when they have been thinking about a place from the outside for a while and are now comparing it to what they imagined. Her eyes moved from shelf to shelf, touching everything without touching anything. Danny did not look up right away. He finished the stroke of paint he was doing, then set the brush down, then looked. She was alone this time. He nodded once, the way you nod at someone you have seen before without making it a big thing. Then he went back to the fin. She moved slowly into the shop. She stopped in front of the wind-up fish in the window display and watched it swim its small circles. Then she moved on. She looked at a row of stuffed animals on the middle shelf, a set of small wooden puzzles, a mechanical bird that could flap its wings. She did not touch any of them. After a while, she came to the bench and stood at the far end of it. Danny was still painting. He could see her in his side vision, standing very straight, very still. He noticed she was holding something against her chest. He did not ask about it. He finished the fin, held it up to the light to check the color match, then set it down to dry. He picked up a soft cloth and cleaned his hands. He looked at her. She put the music box on the counter. IT made a small sound when it touched the wood, a quiet click. She took her hands away from it slowly, like she was making herself let go. Danny leaned forward. He had repaired a great many things in his life, human and alien both. The lower district saw a lot of different people and a lot of different objects, and some of them ended up at his bench eventually. He had learned that fixing things required first understanding what they were, not just what was broken about them. He studied the music box without picking it up. The material it was made of had a soft, uneven surface, very old, worn smooth in the places it had been held the most. The design on the lid was detailed, small interlocking shapes that he thought at first were decorative, but which repeated in a pattern too precise to be random. One side was cracked along the length of it, a clean break, like it had fallen from a height onto something hard. He picked it up carefully with both hands. He turned the small key at the back. Nothing. The mechanism inside did not engage at all. He could feel, faintly, that there were parts in there, but whatever connected them had failed. He set it back down. The girl was watching his face. He said, "I can't fix it today." She said nothing. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted, like she had expected that answer. He said, "I need to figure out what's inside before I open it. I don't want to damage anything I can't put back." He looked at her. "Can you come back?" "A few days." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, turned around, and walked out. Danny sat with the music box for a long time after she left. That evening, he did something he had not done in years. He went through every reference book he owned on alien-made objects, 3 shelves at the back of his workshop, organized badly and never fully read. He found a section on Solhari decorative craft in an old trade reference manual from the early days of the compact. The design patterns on the lid matched a category described in the book as ceremonial personal objects, given only at birth, kept for life. Danny read that part twice. The book said such objects were rare. It said they did not change hands under ordinary circumstances. The footnote at the bottom of the page was very small and said, "Typically associated with high-status Olhari families, including in some historical cases the Imperial line itself." Danny closed the book. He looked at the music box sitting on his bench in the quiet shop. He thought about the girl's hands when she had put it down, how slowly she had let go of it. He pulled out his tools and got to work. 3 days later, Danny had the music box open on his bench, spread carefully across a clean white cloth, its parts laid out in the order he had removed them. The inside was more complicated than he had expected. Solhari clockwork did not follow the same logic as human clockwork. The pieces were smaller, more numerous, and connected in ways that made sense only when you understood that the whole mechanism was designed to move in two directions at once. One layer of gears driving the melody, another layer underneath doing something he could not identify, but which seemed important. The crack in the casing had bent one of the connector pins just slightly out of alignment, which was enough to stop everything, that he could not replace the pin. He did not have Solhari materials and could not get them quickly without drawing attention. He did not want to draw to an object that a footnote in a trade manual had described, in very careful language, as potentially imperial in origin. He made a new one. He worked with a thin piece of human watchmaker's brass and a small jeweler's file, and spent the better part of an evening shaping it. Then he spent another evening fitting it, because fitting required patience, and patience was something Danny had in long supply. When he finally turned the key and the mechanism caught and held, and the first note came out of the box, thin and clear in the quiet of the empty shop, he sat back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. The melody was short. 8 notes, repeated twice, then a pause, then 8 notes again. Simple, the way lullabies are always simple. It did not need to be complicated to be what it was. She came back the next morning. The old figure was with her again, waiting outside on the pavement, collar up, watching the street with the careful stillness of someone who was very practiced at watching without being noticed. Danny saw them through the window as the girl came in, but he did not say anything. He went to the shelf where he had put the music box, brought it to the counter, set it down in front of her. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. He turned the key. The melody came out. 8 notes, pause, 8 notes, filling the small shop with a sound that was delicate and old and clearly not made for human ears, because Danny felt it mostly in his chest, a faint resonance, rather than hearing it clearly. But the girl heard it. He could see that immediately. She went very still. That it was not the stillness of surprise. It was the stillness of someone who had not been prepared, despite expecting something, for how much it would affect them. Her hands came up slowly and pressed flat against the counter on either side of the box. Her eyes fixed on the lid. Her jaw was tight. She did not cry. Whatever she had been taught, it included not crying in front of people. Danny recognized that kind of control. He had practiced it himself for years after his daughter died. He turned away and went to the small corner of the shop where he kept a kettle and 2 chipped mugs. He made tea without asking. He set one mug on the counter beside the music box and took the other to his side of the bench and sat down. She looked at the mug. He said, "You don't have to drink it. I just didn't want you to stand there with nothing." She picked up the mug. She smelled it first, cautious, then took a small sip. She did not react much, but she did not put it down either. They sat in silence for a while, the melody still running on its loop between them. The door opened. The old figure stepped inside. Danny had not heard footsteps, which meant whoever this was moved very quietly for their age. They stood just inside the door and looked at Danny across the length of the shop. The look was measuring, direct, and not unfriendly, but not easy either. Danny looked back. He did not feel the need to speak first. The old figure placed one hand flat over their heart and lowered their head slowly, a bow that carried a weight to it Danny could not name. It was not a casual gesture. It was the kind of movement that belonged to something formal, something with history in it. Danny stood up from his stool. He put his own hand over his heart and bowed back, copying the angle as best he could. He heard the faintest sound from across the counter. The girl was watching him. She made a small noise that might have been, from any other child, a suppressed laugh. The old figure lifted their head. Something in their expression had changed, very slightly, in the direction of warmth. They said, in accented English, "She will come again, if that is acceptable." Danny said, "The door's always open." They nodded once. Then they looked at the girl and said something in Solhari, a single short phrase. The girl set down her mug, picked up the music box, and tucked it against her chest. She looked at Danny once more. Then she followed the figure out. That night, from somewhere far above the city, a message was sent on a secured Solhari communication channel. It traveled through 4 relay points before it reached its destination. The message was short. It said only, "He does not know who she is." He helped anyway. He did not ask for anything in return. The reply took 3 hours, IT said. Continue to observe. The lower district knew something was wrong before anyone said a word about IT. That IT started with the vendors. The Druori family at the food stall shut their window early and turned off the music. The woman who ran the laundry next door to Danny's shop pulled her cart inside and locked it. People on the street found reasons to be somewhere else. The whole block went quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when something large is coming, and the people who live close to the ground can feel it before they can see it. Danny was in the middle of repainting a wooden pull horse when a shadow fell across his window that he looked up. 3 figures stood outside in dark, fitted uniforms, the kind that did not belong to any Earth authority he recognized. Tall, silver-toned, standing in the absolutely straight posture of people who had been trained to stand that way for long hours without thinking about it. Solhari military. The door opened before he could decide what to do about it, and a 4th figure came in. Commander Sale was not what Danny would have called warm. He was precise, sharp-featured, somewhere in the middle range of Solhari age that Danny could not read well, with eyes that moved around the shop quickly and thoroughly before they landed on Danny, and stayed. .2 soldiers came in behind him. They did not reach for anything. They just stood. Sale said, "You are the owner of this shop." It was not a question, but Danny answered it. "Yes. A child has been visiting you. Not human. Small. Silver complexion." Danny set down the paintbrush. "Yes. How many times?" 4 or 5 times. "I didn't count exactly." Sale's eyes moved over the bench, the tools, the half-painted horse. "What did she want?" "She brought something to be repaired." "I repaired it." "What was the object?" Danny paused for just a moment. Not because he was going to lie, but because he was deciding how much the truth was going to complicate things. He decided it did not matter. A music box. Old. Solhari made. One side was cracked, and the mechanism had a bent pin. Sale looked at him steadily. "You opened it." "I had to fix it. I was careful." "You knew what it was." "I had a guess." "I didn't ask her about it." "Why not?" Danny looked at him. "Because it wasn't my business. She came here to get it fixed, not to be questioned." "I fixed it." Sale said nothing for a moment. One of the soldiers behind him had started moving slowly along the shelves, looking at the toys with the careful attention of someone checking for something specific. The other stayed by the door. Danny watched them, but did not say anything. He had nothing to hide. He just waited. Sale walked to the bench. He looked at the tools. He looked at the shelves behind Danny, the reference books, the parts trays, the old photographs Danny kept pinned to the wood above the window. His eyes stopped at one of them. That IT was a photograph of a girl, 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the front step of the shop with a gap-toothed smile, holding up a repaired stuffed rabbit she had brought in 2 days before. Dark hair, paint on her fingers, the particular happiness of a child who has just gotten something back that mattered to her. Sale said, "Who is she?" Danny said, "My daughter." A pause. "She does not come to the shop. She died 8 years ago." Sale was quiet. Whatever calculation was running behind his eyes slowed down. He looked at the photograph for another moment. Then he looked at Danny. Danny did not look away. He had gotten used to saying those words over the years. They did not hurt less. He had just gotten very practiced at saying them without falling apart in front of strangers. Sale turned away from the photograph. He said to the soldiers, "Enough." They stopped. The one by the shelves came back to the center of the room. Sale said to Danny, "You will be contacted in the coming days. Do not discuss this visit with anyone." Danny said, "Is she safe?" "The child." Sale stopped. He turned back. He looked at Danny with an expression that was hard to read. Not suspicious anymore. Not quite, but not finished either. Like he was recalculating something. He said, "She is safe." "Good," Danny said. "That's all I needed to know." Sale held his gaze for another second. Then he turned and went to the door. The soldiers followed. Before the last one stepped out, the small figure of the girl appeared suddenly in the open doorway, stepping around the soldier's leg to look inside. She looked at Sale's back, then past him at Danny. She lifted her free hand slightly and moved her lips. 2 words, no sound. Danny did not speak Solhari, but Wynne, standing just beyond the doorway, heard them and closed their eyes for a moment. She had said, "Thank you." Danny raised one hand in a small wave. The girl was guided away by the soldiers. The door closed. The street outside stayed quiet for a long time. Danny picked up his paintbrush, looked at it, then put it back down as he sat in the silence of his shop and looked at his daughter's photograph and did not do anything else for a while. The man who came 3 days later did not arrive with soldiers. He arrived alone, walking slowly, with a carved walking stick and a coat that was simple in cut, but clearly not simple in material, the kind of simple that costs a great deal. He was old in the way that only very old Solhari get. The silver of his skin faded to something closer to white, his movements unhurried, because hurrying was something he had left behind decades ago. He stood outside the shop for a moment and read the sign beside the door. Then he came inside. Danny was at the bench. He looked up. The old man said, in English so clean it had no accent at all, "My name is Durrell. I hold the title of First Ambassador of the Solhari Compact. I have held it for 31 years. He paused. I thought you should know who you were speaking to before I begin. Danny said, all right. Durrell looked at the 2 chairs near the window, the ones Danny kept for customers who needed to sit and wait. He moved to one and sat down slowly, setting his walking stick across his knees. He looked at Danny across the shop and waited. Danny came around the bench and sat in the other chair. Durrell said, the child's name is Rova. She is 11 years old. He folded his hands over the walking stick. 2 years ago, the Solhari Empress died, a fever that moved too fast to stop. Rova is her only child. She is the last of the imperial bloodline. Danny sat with that for a moment. He did not say anything. Durrell continued. When the Empress died, certain factions within the outer territories saw an opportunity. There were threats made against Rova's life. 3 of them were serious enough to act on. The decision was made to remove her from Solhari space until she was old enough to take the throne and the political situation had stabilized. He looked out the window at the street. Earth was chosen because it was considered unremarkable. No one would think to look here. Danny said, and when? Durrell looked at him. You know the Guardian's name? She told me a few visits ago. I didn't know Wynn was military. Wynn is the oldest living member of the Imperial Guard. She volunteered for the assignment herself. Durrell paused, which tells you how seriously she took it. Danny nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. He had paint under 2 of his fingernails from the horse he had finished the day before. He had not gotten it all out, yet he said, why are you telling me this? Durrell said, because you are owed an explanation, and because what I am about to tell you next requires that you understand the full weight of it. He shifted slightly in the chair, settling in, like a man preparing to say something he had said before, but never to someone like this. In Solhari law, there is an old designation. It dates back further than our current system of government. It is called the unmarked loyal. Danny looked at him. It is given to a person who serves the royal line without knowing they're doing so, who provides genuine care or protection or aid to the crown, freely and without any expectation of reward, before any revelation of identity. Durrell met his eyes. It has not been granted to someone outside Solhari species in 412 years. The shop was quiet. Out on the street, a vendor was calling something, far enough away that the words were unclear. Danny said, I fixed a music box. You fixed a music box for a child who was grieving her mother and had no way to ask for help properly and no reason to trust anyone on this planet. Durrell's voice was even, not dramatic, just precise. You did not charge her. You did not ask who she was. You did not report the object to any authority despite clearly knowing it was not ordinary. You turned away soldiers politely. And when they asked if the child was safe, that was the only question you had. He paused. Danny Holt, you have been observed for 3 weeks. Everything that was seen was consistent. Danny was quiet for a long moment. He said, she used to practice her English here. The last few visits, she learned the word for paintbrush and the word for hinge. She wanted to know why I kept the broken things on the shelf after I fixed them, the ones nobody came back for. He looked at the shelves. I told her I kept them because they deserved to be somewhere, even if nobody claimed them. Durrell looked at the shelves too. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she told me that. In those words, exactly. It was the first full sentence she had spoken in Solhari in 6 months. Danny said nothing. Durrell stood slowly, taking the walking stick. He stood straight and looked at Danny and said, There will be a formal ceremony. It will be public, and it will be significant, and I imagine it will be uncomfortable for you. I'm sorry for that. Danny said, is she going to be okay? Going back. The threats, the politics. Durrell looked at him for a moment. He said, she is stronger than people expect. She has always been. But I think the last several weeks may have contributed to that in ways I did not anticipate. Danny nodded. Durrell moved toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back. What would you like me to tell her? From you. Danny thought about it. He said, tell her the wind-up fish is hers if she wants it. The one in the window. She liked watching it. Durrell looked at the small metal fish swimming its slow circles in the display case. He stood there a moment longer than necessary. Then he went out into the street without another word. Back on the ship, he told Commander Sale, I understand now why she kept going back. Sale said nothing, but he did not disagree. The ceremony was held in the Caldwell City Orbital Platform, a wide hall that had been used before for trade agreements and the occasional diplomatic signing. It did not usually hold 200 Solhari dignitaries, a delegation from the Earth Compact Council for news crews, and one toy repairman from the lower district who had come in his regular clothes because he had declined, politely but firmly, every offer of formal attire. Danny stood near the center of the hall and tried to be comfortable. He was not comfortable. But he was not a man who needed comfort to stand still and hold his ground, so it amounted to the same thing. The hall was very different from his shop. The ceiling was high. The light was cold and precise. People kept looking at him with expressions he could not fully interpret, part curiosity, part something else he didn't have a word for. The Earth Council representatives had sent someone to brief him the day before on the historical significance of the unmarked loyal title. He had listened carefully and nodded and said thank you. He had not slept well. Ambassador Durrell stood at the far end of the hall, near a raised platform, watching proceedings with the patience of a man who had attended hundreds of events like this and knew they always took longer than planned. Commander Sale stood to the right, in full dress uniform, perfectly still. Wynne stood off to the side, dressed now in the gray and silver of the Imperial Guard. Every line of her posture different from the worn coat and careful invisibility Danny had known. She looked like a completely different person and also exactly the same. She caught his eye across the room. She placed her hand flat over her heart, briefly, then lowered it. Danny did the same. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened and Rova walked in. He almost did not recognize her. She wore the full formal dress of the Solhari Imperial line, layered pale cloth in colors that shifted slightly as she moved, the music box held in both hands in front of her. Her hair was arranged in the way Solhari royalty arranged it for official functions, elaborate and precise. She was 11 years old, and she walked like someone who had been told from birth that a room full of people staring was simply a thing she would need to learn to carry. She walked the length of the hall and stopped in front of Danny. For a moment, she just looked at him. Away from his shop, away from the plain clothes and the quiet street. She was clearly something else. The weight of what Durrell had told him was visible now in the way it had not been when she was sitting at his counter drinking tea. Then she held out the music box. Danny took it carefully in both hands. He turned it slightly and looked at the side he had repaired, the crack filled and smooth, the brass pin he had made himself holding everything in alignment. He handed it back. She said, in English she had clearly been practicing because it was slower and more careful than her usual, "You fixed what I thought was gone forever." The hall was very quiet. Danny said, "You just needed someone to take the time." She looked at him for a moment, and the formality of the room, and the formal clothes, and the 200 witnesses fell away for just that second into something much simpler. She was a child who had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and a man who recognized that weight because he had carried his own version of it, and between them was a repaired music box and a debt that the Solhari considered historic, but which Danny considered just a thing he had done because it needed doing. Durrell stepped forward and read the formal designation in Solhari, then in English. The title of Unmarked Loyal. The last non-Solhari to receive, it was named in the reading. 412 years ago. The hall was silent throughout. When it was over, Rova leaned forward and placed the music box in Danny's hands again, this time pressing his fingers around it gently. Clearly a deliberate gesture, not incidental. She said in Solhari, one sentence. Wynne translated, from across the room without being asked. Her voice was steady. She said, "She says it belongs with the person who gave it back to her." Danny looked down at the box. He thought about saying something about how it was hers and should stay with her. He decided against it. She was 11, and she had just made a deliberate choice in a room full of 200 people, and she deserved to have that choice respected. He closed his hands around it. After the ceremony, there was a reception that Danny moved through slowly, shaking hands and accepting words he mostly could not process until Rova appeared beside him and asked, in English, whether she could still come to his shop. He said yes. She asked if he would still fix things for free. He said yes. Always, she said good, and moved away to stand with Wynn. He went home that evening through the lower district, the same route he always took, past the Druhari food stall and the laundry and the string of small lights someone had put up outside the building at the end of his street. The music box was in his jacket pocket. He unlocked the shop and went inside. He turned on the bench light. He sat down. There was something on the step that he had seen when he came up the street, a small shape in brown paper, left against the door. He had brought it in with him. He opened it now, a toy. A small stuffed dog with one ear torn nearly off and a button that had been pushed in so far it had gone through the fabric inside. There was a note folded underneath it. He opened the note. It said, "Please fix him. I have no money." Danny smoothed the note flat on the bench. He looked at the dog. He looked at the note. He looked up at the window, where the city lights were reflected in the glass, and somewhere above them, very faint and very distant, the particular light of Solhari Prime was beginning its slow arc across the sky. He picked up the dog. He picked up his tools. He got to work.